Welcome to Tuesday's devotions. We come here to Job chapters 30 and 31 and the final part of his defense. We've had these 6 chapters of him defending himself, and this is the final part. And two very different and very fascinating chapters for us to focus on here. Let's read a wee bit from chapter 30 first of all. But now they laugh at me, men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. What could I gain from the strength of their hands, men whose vigour is gone? Through want and hard hunger they gnaw the dry ground, by night in waste and desolation. They pick saltwort and the leaves of bushes and the roots of the broom tree for their food. They are driven out from human company. They shout at them as after a thief. In the gullies of the torrents they must dwell, in holes of the earth and of the rocks. Among the bushes they bray, under the nettles they huddle together. A senseless and nameless brood, they have been whipped out of the land. And now I have become their song. I am a byword to them. They abhor me, they keep aloof from me. They do not hesitate to spit at the sight of me. Because God has loosed my cord and humbled me, they have cast off restraint in my presence. On my right hand the rabble rise, they push away my feet. They cast up against me their ways of destruction. And then we'll go to chapter 31 and just read a few verses there. I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? What would be my portion from God above and my heritage from the Almighty and High? Is not calamity for the unrighteous and disaster for the workers of iniquity? Does not he who sees my ways and numbers all my steps? If I have walked with falsehood, and my foot had hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance, and let God know my integrity. If my step had turned away from the way, and my heart had gone after my eyes, and if any spot had stuck to my hands, then let me sow and another eat. Let what grows for me be rooted out. If my heart had been enticed towards a woman, and I have lain in wait at my neighbour's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down on her. Amen. Now, after speaking in chapter 29 of his previous life in which he was held in such high esteem even by nobles and princes, Job now shares how he's laughed at here in chapter 30 and verse 1. And he's laughed at here even by the lowest of the society. He's laughed by the children of men who he wouldn't even allow his men to be with his dogs. He describes these as a shameful people who are driven out of normal society because of what they're like. And then he then speaks of how these people who are driven out the lowest of the low, they sing about him, they abhor him, they spit on him, they are aloof, they think they're better than him, and they show no restraint in how they treat him. These mockers are like a rabble who rise up against him, who delight to make his path rough, he says, and they come like a great multitude breaking through a breached wall. It's like if those films where there's a city behind a wall being defended and the wall is then breached and a great army just comes in through like a great crowd, a great multitude at once. And this is how Job feels. These lowest of the low just have come like a great flood against him. The result is his life is one of terror, his honour has disappeared, and he speaks in verse 16 by pouring out his soul. There's no rest for him in this. He blames God and he feels God is against him. He says that in verses 19 to 23. He has lost sight of God's love for him. He can't understand that when he saw the poor in need, he helped them. But why is it when he's in need, no one helps him? That's something he just can't grasp. This is a man who's reached the depths of despair and hopelessness. I take time to read through that because these chapters are amazing chapters in what he shares. Then over to chapter 31, and in this is final part of his defence, he lists quite a number of sins. And he says if he had been guilty of them, then he truly would have deserved to be punished for that sin. Some of the sins he includes here in verse 1, lustful gazing after other women. Verse 5, walking in falsehood. Verse 9, adultery. Verse 13, unjust treatment of his servants. Verse 16, not helping the poor. Verse 19, not helping those perishing from a lack of clothes. Verse 21, acting against orphans. Verse 24, trusting in riches. Verse 26, worshipping the sun and the moon. Verse 29, rejoicing when his enemies would fall. Verse 33, secret sin. And verse 39, not paying his workers. So you go through this. It's such an amazing list of sins. And he says, if I had been guilty of these, then he speaks of how he deserves to be punished. But the point is, he's not guilty. He has been innocent of this. He's a righteous man. He's a man, indeed, who's lived a blameless life before the Lord. It just reminds us you through this chapter, the tremendous righteous character that Job had, the integrity that was in his life. And I wonder, there's a challenge for us to go through those lists and ask, are we innocent of these sins? Take time to go through this chapter and think about that. Job again asks that he could please his cause before the Almighty in verses 35 to 37. Here was a man of righteous and blameless living, an example for us to follow. And he knows that he has done nothing to deserve this. He's a just man before the Lord. He's been in a right relationship. And he just can't understand. He still just can't understand, why is this happening to him? As we go on, we'll see what answers will come. God bless.